Hi everybody, I'm DJ Sixsmith. Welcome to Sit Down. I Am Human is coming to the Tribeca Film Festival. Elena Gaby, Taryn Southern. How are you guys?
So nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you guys.
Thanks for having us.
First of all, congrats on the film. You guys are celebrating your little 2-year anniversary here in terms of being friends. So
we are.
Yes.
Friends, business partners.
yeah, a little bit of everything. So
Everything.
why don't we start with that? How did you guys first meet, and how did you guys come to a point where this was going to be a business relationship? Taryn, let's start with you.
Well, I started putting the pieces of this film together about 2.5 years ago, and Elena was recommended because of her work in documentary filmmaking. So we dove in together, researching, meeting with scientists, and it became pretty obvious fairly quickly that we made a really good partnership. So we ended up deciding to direct the film together.
That's awesome. So when Taryn comes to you, what did you first think about all this stuff that she was bringing?
Oh, wow. So Taryn actually had much more background and knowledge in this science and tech space, and neurotech in particular, and I was a novice. So I had to catch up really quickly, and I think
She was given massive books.
Yes, like 25-page, Taryn research guide with like all of this stuff with like bullet points on bullet points. And my most important thing those first 2 weeks was like write down my gut reaction, the most visceral feeling that I have for each thing, because in as little as 3 weeks or as little as 1 month, that sense of like wow can go away because you're so immersed in the research by that point. So really like paying as close attention to my reactions as possible and hoping to keep that. And I referenced those notes like until the end.
That's awesome.
Just how did I feel the first time?
No question about it. And I think people are going to have a mix of emotional reactions here because brain implant technology is still kind of this new thing that we're implementing into culture. And then also people are wondering how much artificial intelligence will change things. So Taryn, you had some knowledge about it. Once you start to meet with these scientists, meet the people that are getting this stuff done, like what fascinated you the most about it?
I mean, all of it. I've been very into this subject matter for a long time now. I do think it's one of those areas that doesn't get the attention it deserves, and so a lot of people just aren't aware of what's really happening in the space right now. And as Elena was saying, when you first become aware of what's actually going on, it's insane. Like you're like, how is this not? This is better than science fiction.
Why are we not talking about this every day?
Why are we not talking about this? There are several 100,000 people walking around out there with brain implants. We don't think about it that way.
No.
They're the first cyborgs. They're here. So
that's a wild concept. It really is.
So I think being able to tell that story, which hasn't been told, was very exciting for us. And I found myself just really drawn to. Obviously, the technology is fascinating, but even more so is who are the faces at the front lines of this technology, and what are their stories, and how do we tell those stories, and how do we translate these harder, tougher concepts to an audience that may not be familiar with.
Right. So from a filmmaking perspective, how do you take all of this and simplify it into a documentary that people can actually digest?
That is the million-dollar question. But I think one of the ways that we created certain criteria. So not only did the technology have to be really fascinating and cutting edge for the neuroscience community and for the technology community, but it also had to have this potential for impact on an individual scale and on a massive societal scale. And the biggest questions that we were thinking about was, how are these individual human beings going to grapple with the questions that come up the minute they're introduced to these options? So the more interesting technologies for us were the ones that not only presented an advancement in the science field, but also a societal question, or a family question, or am I going to take this risk? And I think that's really where the heart of the stories came out, and that's what we try to focus on.
Yeah, because you guys talked to some people who had some really huge debilitating diseases or issues in their life, and they have these questions. So were you surprised at how people kind of responded to it? Because technology can change their life, but at the same time, there's sort of these moral questions. So Taryn, what did you make of all of that?
Well, we saw an assortment with the subjects that we interviewed. Some people were pretty enthusiastic about this sort of leap forward that they could take, and this idea that they could restore a part of their humanity that they felt that they had lost, while others were more reluctant. And I think the same is true everywhere you find this technology. You'll see these, as Elena was saying, these individual questions that have to be posited the second that you undergo some kind of brain surgery. Like, is this going to change who I am? Is this going to change a part of my essence, my identity? And then as a result of that, what do you make of hundreds of thousands of people now undergoing these procedures? What does that look like on a societal scale? Who are the players that are involved? What are the questions that we should all be asking ourselves as we move on this trajectory that is gaining speed?
Yeah, I think it's almost important now to just ask a simple question. Like, you mentioned these hundreds of thousands of people, like, what types of technology are they walking around with, and who are some of these people, just so people can understand, like, this is happening. So either of you guys feel free to jump on that.
Yeah.
A vast majority of the current patients walking around with deep brain stimulation devices in their head are Parkinson's patients. It's a well-studied area of brain implants, so it's been around for a little while now, and it works. It's quite successful, but they're also in trials for Alzheimer's and for obesity and for a number of other different indications. And you'll also find epileptic patients are often great candidates for brain implants. So what we're usually talking about are electrodes that are implanted pretty deep within the skull.
Gotcha.
And what in whatever area of the brain is needing that electrical stimulation.
And what are, like, the big risks that come with this sort of stuff?
Well, the brain is the most important organ that defines who we are as people. And the risk is that we don't fully understand it, and things could go wrong, both on, a very visceral level of, like, the wrong electrode going in the wrong place could create, very problematic implications. And I think also, even if the device does work, does that change your sense of identity because now there is a machine, helping you be who you are? And what does that mean? Does it feel like it's you? Does it not feel like it's you? Do you absorb that technology as part of your identity? And that's going to be different for every individual. So there's a wide range.
Yeah, no doubt.
I think what I find most interesting about this subject matter is that even the question of what could go wrong is nuanced. And is something really going wrong if it's placed in your brain, electrically stimulating you, and it happens to benefit other areas that you didn't anticipate? Right? The brain does not discern between different areas of the brain and other parts of the brain. It all works together in a cohort. So if you impact one thing, chances are you can impact another thing as well. And I think we saw this quite a lot with our scientists, the ones who are really on the cutting edge of breakthrough research, and they're doing trials, and they're not totally certain what's going to happen when they're implanting these individuals. And a lot of times they have these unanticipated reactions occur in these patients that cannot be quantified as good or bad. They just simply are. So, for instance, there was one of our neurosurgeons had implanted a woman in a trial for obesity. They were trying to figure out how to get her hunger signals to stop firing. And so they placed the electrode in that area of the brain that they thought would regulate appetite. Ends up stimulating her, and she has these vivid visions from 20, 30 years ago that she didn't even remember had existed in her brain. So they had simultaneously ended up somehow stimulating the memory region or a portion of the memory region. And now she had, and when they realized when they stimulated her for long periods of time at a lower voltage, that she could actually have increased memory and processing speeds in testing.
So it's like these accidents. It's crazy. I mean,
this was for obesity.
Yeah.
And so the obesity trial did not work.
But all of a sudden, boom, we tap into memory, which is just this accidental discovery.
That's right.
So I'm sure the scientists are all game for this because, like, they've been waiting for this moment. But who are the groups of people that are pushing back the most on this?
That's a good question. I actually think that because we don't have a lot of information about this, and it doesn't feel like it's quite mainstream yet, it almost feels as though people are just letting this fly under the radar because they're not informed. So one of my biggest goals was, like, let's make sure that everybody understands what is happening so that you can form an opinion. And if you decide that you don't like this, let your voice be heard and have that come out, but have an educated reason as to why.
Gotcha, yeah.
So maybe we'll see more of that come out once the film is released. I don't know.
You know, I think it's really interesting because it's like we've had hearing aids and all different types of technologies that have helped people, but suddenly when we talk about the brain and brain implants, that's scary to people. So I like you said,
Do you find it scary?
No, I think it ultimately will help people. Like if there's a person living with Parkinson's and this can make their life potentially better, then I think that can be a good thing for them because it's such a hard thing to deal with. At the same time, I can understand why a family would be a little averse to that. But like you said, it's still such a new thing and kind of breaking through societal norms. This is a huge societal norm to break through. So I think your film will really have an opportunity to do that. So when people do see it, what are some of the things you want people to take away?
I mean, I hope they come out with more questions than answers, which is a common common desire of any filmmaker. But as Elena was saying, having a more a nuanced and established view of what's actually happening, having experienced the journey through the lens of these three humans, and I think being able to ask themselves the question, would I potentially do this in my lifetime, or how would I feel if a member of my immediate family was presented with an opportunity to have a brain interface, and how am I going to feel in 10, 15, 20, 30 years when a lot of these procedures potentially are done not just for disease and dysfunction, but for other purposes.
And that's really an interesting question because there's some people that need this, but then if people have the financial resources to say, hey, I'd love for this to be better, I'm sure that's really fascinating for you.
Yeah, and I think one of our scientists even talked about this idea of like cosmetic neurosurgery, right? Which is, it's so hard to find that line. And what I've come to explain is that I don't see a way that you can have the good without the questionable, let's say. I'm not gonna call it bad.
Sure.
I think it's lumped in a package, and I think the only way that you can really start to tear those pieces apart is with like a societal global conversation about our values as a collective, which is very difficult to do.
And those values change over time.
Right.
Totally.
If you look at plastic surgery,
Well, that's what I was just going to say. Yeah, I mean, that was a huge controversial thing. Now it's every single day people are getting that surgery. Yeah.
Growing and growing, and there's very little public backlash now for someone that chooses to share that information, whereas 10, 20 years ago you just didn't do that. But even if you look at the science behind plastic surgery, came out of doctors helping patients who'd lost limbs in the war. And so they developed really great techniques at being able to reconstruct faces and all of that. And now, of course, it's going from the medical, and it's completely become a huge booming industry. And there's no doubt that any sort of technology that can benefit people, we will take advantage of as a society in some form or another. But we all have to decide how we feel about that. And that takes time.
Yeah. So and you guys spent a lot of
It
time.
definitely takes time when we're talking about the brain.
Was there talk about cancer when you guys were going through all this? And
Cancer?
Cancer, just the potential impact, and discovering the cure for cancer is talk everywhere. Were there anybody that was mentioning any of that?
No, that is a really interesting question.
Like using a brain implant to become smarter to discover?
It could be that, or just getting right to the heart of what's causing this person to have cancer in their system. But one of the two.
I don't think that we came across specifically anybody using brain interfaces for cancer, but one thing that did come up was this idea of not only having brain implants, but having other implants in our bodies, which I believe this is coming and it's going to be the greatest thing ever, that tell you when things are off inside your body before your symptoms come up. So imagine, okay, your white blood cell count is high today. Why is that? There must be something going on. Dehydration, whatever the case may be. So my hypothesis and my personal view is that if that happens, would there be a way to have earlier diagnosis so that there would be a greater chance of coming out of it? So I think maybe that's the closest thing so far.
And then if you have that communicating with the device in your brain so that those things are a nice little closed loop system, how does that work? What does that look like? I mean, I already have, Elena knows, I've been obsessed with my I have an Aura ring, which tells me all about my sleep.
Yeah.
So I get my deep sleep and my REM sleep and all of these things that are tracked, and it's essentially like having a little device for my brain.
Totally.
Just on my body.
Yeah, or Fitbit, same sort of thing.
Yep.
Fitbit,
You know?
Right here.
It's changed my behavior.
Yeah.
Like I now do not do the same things to my sleep that are detrimental
Right.
to my brain that I used to, because I can't ignore the data.
Yeah, I feel like we're right at the cusp of this new conversation, but this stuff could totally be commonplace in 10, 15 years. It could be totally commonplace in 30, 40 years. But I think it'll be interesting to kind of look back and see. And that's the beauty of a documentary, is that you can look back on it all these years later. So I'm sure you guys are excited to do that as the years go by.
Well, and we really wanted to capture what we call kind of the origin story. And I'm a huge superhero fan, superhero movies, I love them. So for me, that was a really interesting lens to say, how do you capture this moment in time and what's happening without excluding future possibilities and without it becoming dated?
Right.
And that's why I think these ethical questions are so important, because these are the sci-fi questions we've been asking in storytelling forever. And I think that we will still be grappling with those questions
I agree.
indefinitely.
And it starts with your film. So why don't you guys tell everybody when they can check it out and where they can check it out and all that stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is this
Yeah,
camera?
right here, straight ahead. Let them know. Let the people know.
Well, you can check out I Am Human at the Tribeca Film Festival May 2nd, May 3rd, and May 4th. Tickets are on sale on their website. And then stay tuned. You can follow us on Twitter, I Am Human, or Instagram, I Am Human Film, for more updates on screenings in your area.
Awesome. Good deal. Taryn, Elena,
Thank
you
you
guys
so much for having
Great
us.
to meet you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. See you next time here on The Sit Down.